Shalom. Once again, this Shabbat we shall be reading two Torah portions, the Parashat of Acharei Mot and Kedoshim, which are generally read together in non-leap years, such as this one. The first of our two Torah portions begins with Leviticus chapter 16 and is named for its opening phrase, Acharei Mot, literally after the death of. As we read, Hashem spoke to Moshe after the death of Aaron's two sons, when they approached before Hashem and they died. Strictly speaking, in a chronological sense, which is never the case when it comes to Torah, since Torah is not necessarily presented in chronological order, still in a manner of speaking, last week's portions of Tazria and Metzora were inserted in the middle of a story, and this week's first parsha of Acharei Mot continues from Parashat Shemini, wherein we read in chapter 10 of the death of Nadav and Avihu on the 8th day on Rosh Chodesh Nisan, the day of the dedication of the tabernacle. Acharei Mot begins with a focus on the awesome service of the high priest on Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, in the Holy Temple. And it continues with aspects of service outside the tabernacle and forbidden practices and relationships. Today, I would like to focus on our second Torah portion of Kedoshim, which begins in chapter 19. This parsha opens with a command, and Hashem spoke to Moshe, saying, "Speak to the entire congregation of the children of Israel and say to them, 'You shall be holy, for I, Hashem your God, am holy.'" The message of this portion, this call to holiness, is so important that it was given over to the entire nation, men, women, and children, in assembly. Parashat Kedoshim is full of mitzvot. It features 51 divine commandments in all. And some of these mitzvot fall into the category known as Ben Adam Lamakom. That means commandments that apply to man's relationship with God. These include, in our parsha, prohibitions against idolatry, a false oath, and forbidden mixtures, the commandment of Shabbat, reverence for the temple, and rules pertaining to the sacred offerings, agricultural laws applicable in the Holy Land of Israel, laws against following occult practices of the nations, and more. The other category of mitzvot are the type known as Ben Adam Lechavero, those that are concerned with man's relationship with his fellow man. Keeping these properly is a lot harder and a much greater challenge than keeping those commandments that are only between man and God. A person can act piously in his relationship with God, and at the same time, he could be exploitive or manipulative or just plain downright nasty to his fellow men. Thus, following the call to be holy like Hashem, this portion of Kedoshim includes prohibitions against stealing and making a false oath. One is obligated to pay a worker on time. Tale-bearing and all forms of cheating are forbidden. One must use honest weights and measures and engage in honest business practice. One is obligated to give the other the benefit of the doubt. It's forbidden to curse someone, to trip them up in any way, and one is obligated to help the other in a time of distress. So open up your heart. Hashem created this world. He created man because he loves people. All lives matter. So to be holy like him, according to Torah, is measured by how we treat others. And honestly, nothing else really matters. People might appear to be spiritual and they might act in a very meticulous manner when it comes to religious things that have nothing to do with social interaction. The only true and accurate measure, the Torah standard, of whether a person could be called holy is how he or she treats others. So open up your heart. Among the commandments of our portion of Kedoshim, Torah instructs us in verse 18, "You shall love your fellow as yourself." Regarding this commandment, the great first-century sage Rabbi Akiva, he taught, "This is a major principle of Torah." Those are his words. It's often asked, why did Rabbi Akiva make this statement only concerning this particular commandment? Why didn't he reference other important mitzvot such as Shabbat or Tefillin or so many other fundamental commandments that express Jewish faith in God and obedience to his will? I mean, are the other commandments less important and only this one is a major principle? What's the concept of this great principle that Rabbi Akiva singled out, this commandment? What is the principle that singles it out above all others to make this statement? So the simple explanation is that this one mitzvah of loving one's fellow as yourself includes within it all the Torah's many other commandments concerning man and his fellow man. Proper behavior in every situation involving human interaction is guided by, is a manifestation of loving one's fellow human. And since most of the Torah's commandments that occupy a person on an everyday level that we're constantly dealing with, they deal with matters between people, This principle of loving one's fellow is quite simply the greatest principle in Torah and the foundation of properly observing all other commandments. In this light, we also recall the story which the Talmud records having taken place years before Rabbi Akiva, of a certain heathen who came before the great early sage Hillel. And he said, "Make me a convert on the condition that you teach me the entire Torah while I stand on one foot." Hillel replied, "What is hateful to you, do not do to your neighbor." That's the whole Torah. All the rest is commentary. Go and learn it. So, refraining from speaking evil about another, as we learned about in last week's Parsha, and the prohibition against taking revenge, and the commandment to lend money to the poor, and the commandment to give charity to the needy, and to visit the sick, and honoring the elderly, and all the many detailed decrees that deal with matters of justice, all these are just examples that are rooted in loving one's neighbor as oneself. So it's a major principle of Torah because a person who loves his neighbor as himself, who loves his neighbor's life as his own, won't steal from him, or sin with his wife, or cause him any harm or damage. So the love of the other that Hashem requires of us means act just as you would anticipate to be treated by him. However, I expect another to behave towards me is precisely how I am obligated towards another. So you don't have to be prepared to give your friend everything you own because you're not expecting that from him. But it does mean to act with sincerity and not to feign affection, to treat the other with respect, to be concerned with his welfare, to participate along in his suffering, to receive him with a pleasant countenance, to judge him favorably, always giving the benefit of the doubt whenever possible, and in all things to help according to your ability. All these forms of behavior are aspects of the proper observance of this commandment. So basically what it seems Rabbi Akiva is saying is that he sees in this commandment the embodiment of the whole Torah. But open up your heart in the deepest way. I mean, all of humanity surely recognizes and acknowledges this to be a lofty value. It's such a beautiful ideal to love one's fellow man. And all throughout history, groups and movements, religious, fraternal, and otherwise, have set this principle, supposedly, as a guiding light. And it's a lovely thought. And it's certainly considered by many, if not by the majority of humanity, to be a major component in the fabric of a healthy human society. Humanity is one, and we would hope that it's only natural to help one another, as if a person were actually helping himself. But alas, it isn't natural, because the basic nature of a person is the ego-driven desire to receive for oneself alone. That's only natural. A person needs to be taught, needs to be trained to give to another. And thus, on a deep level of understanding, Rabbi Akiva's lesson goes even further and conveys a deeper meaning regarding the relationship between this commandment and all the others. All the other commandments of the Torah serve to educate and train a person to attain the state wherein he can love the other. This is a very deep idea. And you shall love your fellow as yourself is one commandment, and there are 612 more. And in a sense, observing all the other commandments serves the purpose of strengthening a person's control over his ego, that is, his will, his desire to receive for himself alone, so that he can love the other as himself. Because what is our relationship with the commandments really? Those mitzvot which are ben adam lechavero, meaning the ones of the category that applies to a person's societal interactions, the way he relates with the other, they basically beckon to a person, they're teaching a person, stop. Don't think only of yourself. There's other people in the world here for you to think about. And those commandments are made up of so many details of practical, real situations that have bearing on every aspect of the fabric of society that a person has to know and fulfill, such as monetary laws, laws pertaining to property and damages. One has to know what's permitted and what's forbidden. Laws relating to neighbors and families, and laws of speech, like we learned about last week. What is permitted to say and what is forbidden. But open up your heart in the deepest way. Also, the commandments that have nothing to do with society, with man's interaction with his fellow, the commandments in the category of ben adam lemakom, between man and God, they also serve the purpose in a very practical sense of training a person not to think of himself alone. Those mitzvot stand and declare to a person, look, there's a God in the world to whom you're obligated. So Shabbat and kashrut and all these mitzvot announce you're not here simply to do what you feel like. You were created to do what the Creator requires. So the bottom line in this sense is that all of the Torah's mitzvot can be seen as part of a person's process of education leading to the goal of raising one's consciousness to achieve the ability of being able to love the other as yourself. And in Hashem's great wisdom, Torah commands us to love the other as yourself, framing the love in the context that it's most relatable to a person, himself, his own ego. Let's be honest. Looking at the world, there are many man-made religions that talk of the ideal of loving one's fellow as oneself, focusing on the heartfelt part of this beautiful idea, but without the action. Without obedience to all of God's requirements of us, without subservience to that dynamic of the mitzvot, which always emphasizes God and the other's needs and takes me out of the center, without that, there's no practical training. It's just selective, which is always the problem with man-made religion and man-made values. Taking the part that seems appealing, and frankly, perhaps it's only appealing to my own ego. Man is a social animal, and it's a beautiful thing to focus on the value of loving the other. But our sages are teaching us that without a willingness to do God's will, with a constant goal of subjugating our own personal will, a person can't experience true love of the other, or love of God, or any real spiritual ascent for that matter. And this is one of those commandments in the Torah that's followed by the words, I am Hashem. Love your neighbor, your fellow as yourself, I am Hashem. Hashem is saying to each person, remember, if you were precious enough to me for me to have created you in my image, well, so was the other fellow. I am Hashem means I am Hashem who created all of you, and I treasure unity and seek that there should be unity among you all through the universal value of love, which is the foundation of human unity. This is a major principle of Torah, Rabbi Akiva taught, because this unity is rooted in the belief that God created man. All other forms of man-made unity, whether religiously motivated, politically motivated, or be they social movements, democratic universalism, or materialistic socialism, they're all impermanent and imperfect, because the only true motivation of the love that reflects the unity of man is that which is based on the belief in man's creation by God as a result of his love. And love that isn't founded on I am Hashem is not real. And actually, we can go deeper still if we can understand that everything is a matter of our will versus Hashem's will. All of the world was only created in order to reveal the Creator in its midst, his hidden will in the midst of everything, in the midst of all the chaos and the perceived separation. His will is the exclusive cause that sustains all of creation. Although superficially, it appears to us that there are countless different opposing elements in this world, the deepest truth is that everything is connected in the most wondrous way, all bound up in a higher unity of Hashem, and nothing in this world is not included in Hashem's will. We were given the task of revealing Hashem's unity in this world. We're supposed to be peeling away all the external trappings that are merely distractions that give the illusion of separation. This is actually the purpose of creation, to reveal the will of Hashem as the singular inner force that empowers and sustains all life. We accomplish this revelation by nullifying our own will to Hashem's will. And this should be the guiding rule of everything we do, examining ourselves before we act to ask ourselves, is this Hashem's will? Then I'll do it. If it isn't, then I won't. Among the seemingly strongest opposing elements in creation are people. People clash with each other because by nature they're different from one another. But that's only because these differences are ego-driven. If a person succeeds in subjugating his will to Hashem's will, if he succeeds in subjugating his own nature to the Torah's commandments, then there's no conflict with another person because both people are directed by the same purpose of serving Hashem. When we are able to overcome our natural inclination and bring forth every aspect of our personality to serve Hashem, the differences between people will disappear, and one is able to love the other, realizing that each person is a true revelation of the will of Hashem in creation. In fact, open up your heart, deeper than ever, this is the harmony, the world peace that the prophets describe, that we yearn and pray for, the goodness of life that's the promise of man's true potential. And actually, in the deepest way, the commandment, and you shall love your fellow as yourself, is not a specific, particular individual commandment. It's a divine calling for a man to rise above his egotism, the natural selfishness that establishes his own personal desire as the basis of everything, as the foundation of his world. Through this command, Torah is urging a person to recognize that his job in this world is only to be an emissary to fulfill Hashem's will for his creation, and that he and all his fellow men are the same, despite all perceived differences. And that is the foundation of the whole Torah. Shalom, dear friends. Thank you so much for your support. We appreciate it so very much. It's only your support that enables Jerusalem Lights to continue its outreach of Torah for everyone.